Well, lots to get through tonight, so joining me to discuss the latest news is Nick Cater from the Menzies Research Center. Nick, thanks so much for joining me tonight on Credlin. First of all, I wanted to get into these supposed changes to our immigration system. I know you have written at length about big Australia, social cohesion. What is your take on today's announcement from the government?
Well, they've woken up to political reality, haven't they, James? And they are secretly wanting a big Australia. They've been working towards that. They've thrown the doors wide open, but they're just beginning to wake up to the fact this is very unpopular with the public. Why? Because on the numbers we've been admitting for the last 18 months, we are emitting many more migrants than we are building new homes. So basically, the deficit in housing goes backwards, and so the prices go up and they become more and more unaffordable for Australians. So that's one of the big factors. The other one, I spent an hour this morning in traffic. Rozelle Interchange was involved. You won't be surprised to know. But look, I mean, thousands more cars on the road every quarter. So, that's what's happening. We just can't, it is actually affecting people's lives. People like migrants by and large. I hope so, because I'm one, albeit 30 odd years ago, but we just can't put up with those kind of numbers. And the reality seems to have sunk home to the government.
Yeah, and I mean, do you think that there's starting to be a sense in the community, I suspect that Labor's internal numbers are starting to show them this, that Australians are thinking two things. Number one, as you say, migrants are great. You and I are both migrants to this wonderful country. Indeed. But that, it's becoming a bit of a Ponzi scheme, where you bring in more migrants to create the infrastructure to house more migrants. And that becomes the sole sort of almost economic industry in cities like Sydney.
Yeah, well, Treasury's been running this line for years, right? They make next year's economic figures look better because they build in migrants into that. Migrants are supposed to pay more taxes, etc. They forget, of course, that a lot of migrants don't pay taxes, or a lot of them take welfare. I mean, most migrants become very productive and their children are very productive, but it takes some time. So that is not an automatic effect, them contributing. But that's in the Treasury numbers. And any government that says, as Albanese will be finding out, we're going to cut those numbers, Treasury will say, well, we're going to cut our forecast for how much money you've got in your coffers next year.
Indeed. And, also what kind of messages it's sending to migrants when you see the government's hand-picked High Commissioner to the UK, Stephen Smith, announcing that Australia Day, the Australia Day gala in London, will be cancelled, saying that the event may touch on sensitivities. I mean, Nick, shouldn't a culture that's going to be bringing in large numbers of migrants, trying to bring them into the Australian family, be more confident about itself and not just simply moan about its national day?
He's touched on some sensitivities, all right. James, I'm sure you'll find it, that Australia Day is one of the best days of the year for me. It's the anniversary of the day I became an Australian citizen in 1992. So for me, it's a big celebration. And for people just to say, well, it's the legitimate day, well, that's really just not fair to me, is it? It's really excluding me and you as new migrants who like to celebrate the day. I think it's a terrible, terrible reaction by our High Commissioner. I don't think there's much chance of him revoking it. But what message does it send to Britain? That we're not really proud of Australia? We're enormously proud of Australia and everything that the British contributed to it too, for that matter. And we need to do that. We need to be like New Zealand, don't we? Right now, where they're saying, getting more and more saying, well, we are going to call this country New Zealand. We are going to be proud of this country, New Zealand. And we've got to do the same here.
And I think what they're doing over there is a great example of that sort of cultural confidence. But, if they changed the day anyway, people would find something else to complain about. Now, I want to talk about, just on this whole sort of cultural issue, too, really interesting thing here came out. And I want to talk about The Voice. We haven't spoken about that for ages. Megan Davis, one of the co-authors of the Uluru Dialogue, has now blamed a hatred of politicians for The Voice's failure. Actually, I think she might be onto something, but what do you think?
Well, a lot of politicians we love, don't we? Jacinta Price, for one. But
she's great.
What I don't get about Megan Davis and this crowd is, why don't they actually listen to what was said? Why don't they actually go back and rewind the tape about the adverts that were being run, the way people were reacting on talkback radio? It was very obvious. We do not, Megan, write this down, Megan, if you're listening, write this down. We do not want to be divided according to race. Full stop. That's it. That's it. You don't need to know anything more. We might not be too keen on one or two politicians. That's nothing to do with it, honestly. It was just we don't want to be divided by race. How many times do we have to say that?
Well, speaking, Nick, of politicians that I think some of our viewers might not be too keen on, the New South Wales Liberal Shadow Minister for Health, Matt Keane, he's over in Dubai right now at the UN COP28 Talk Fest, and he thinks Donald Trump and Tony Abbott give Conservatives a bad name when it comes to tackling climate change. Have a look at this, Nick.
I think that Donald Trump and Tony Abbott give Conservatives a bad name when it comes to tackling climate change. They're the outliers when it comes to Conservatives' response in a policy sense to one of the greatest challenges of our time. The reality is that most centre-right governments are actually leading the way when it comes to this issue.
Nick, how has Keane's Liberal Party membership not been revoked after this sort of thing?
I don't get involved in liberal politics, but I don't. How did he get one in the first place? I think is the question, James. Look, Matt's a nice guy by all accounts, but he just is deluded, and I use that word, very carefully here. Deluded on this, Matt. It is not. It is not the existential challenge that you seem to think it is. But I just think that Matt needs to go out and talk to some engineers, because you can push this as fast as you can. But at the end of the day, we are beyond peak renewables in this country. Every day there is solar panels wanting to put electricity into the grid. The grid can't take it in the middle of the day. We're saturated with the stuff. What we need is baseload, Matt, baseload.
Bingo.
And you used to be energy minister. You should know what that word is and what that means. We need baseload, not more of this junk energy in the middle of the day from people's solar panels.
And I'll tell you what, Nick, an awful lot of Conservatives want nuclear power, which I notice a lot of Labour types don't. So, who's anti the science now? Before I let you go, though, I've got to ask you about this crazy story now where, and this hits very close to home for me, the UN is going after beef and dairy as part of their newly released United Nations food map, supposedly designed to save the world from runaway climate change. They also want to ban wood fires, have sugar taxes, do all sorts of other things. Now, I don't know about you, Nick, but for me, I would take advice from Vladimir Putin's KGB before I took advice from the UN on what I eat.
And by the way, I think Vladimir Putin is not a vegetarian. I could be wrong on that. I don't think he'd be accepting this. Look, this is nonsense. All this new kind of meatless meat that Bill Gates is inventing in his backyard or something. Honestly, this stuff has got a higher carbon footprint, if that's your concern, than actual properly grown meat. And free range beef is perfectly good for the environment and delicious too. So, I think we're getting to the end of this. Fingers crossed. I think we are towards peak woke, James, and I don't think this will last very long. But it is tiresome, isn't it?
I don't know. Every time we get up to sort of the K2 peak of Everest of wokeness, there's this Everest peak of woke right next door. Nick, thanks so much for your time. Go off and enjoy a